But I never shared this with anybody.
Okay. But you took it. That's the problem. Okay? That's where we're at right now.
This is Dr. Shannon You, 2 hours after she was arrested. And when the FBI picked her up, they also found a briefcase containing $4,000 and suspect she was about to flee the country. The then 56-year-old might make for an unlikely spy, but nudged by an FBI interrogator, she's about to talk herself into a 14-year prison sentence for stealing $120 million worth of trade secrets. In the process, the case will reveal details of how industrial espionage has become a cornerstone of China's economic growth.
My name is Jordan Robertson, and I'm a cybersecurity reporter for Bloomberg here in London. This story is about an incentive system that the likes of which the world has never seen before. Dr. Shannon You was a chemical engineer for Coca-Cola. She evaluated the coatings that went inside all of the cans that Coca-Cola makes. What these formulations do is they actually protect the can from the Coke. They prevent the chemicals in soda from eroding the can that they're in.
For the companies that make it, like BASF, Dow Chemical, and AkzoNobel, the chemical formulas are a closely guarded secret. They cost an estimated $120 million to develop. So far, no Chinese company has managed to develop an equivalent. And You has the formulas on her hard drive.
I have never shared any technology with anybody in China. Okay, I go back to China because my mom being in the last stage of her life, and so I took every opportunities to go to China to see my mom.
At the start of the interrogation, You is adamant that she's done nothing wrong. But she's being a little disingenuous because she has been going back to China to interview for the 1,000 Talents program.
The 1,000 Talents program is a Chinese national government program, and it's designed to incentivize ethnic Chinese who have moved abroad to work or study to return to China and to start businesses there.
The critics of the program say it's really a multi-billion-dollar scheme that incentivizes them to steal foreign technology and bring it home with them. And this is the guy that the FBI alleges has been helping her application, Liu Zhangchen. He's the chief engineer for Weihai Jinhong Group. And that company wants to get into the business of making BPA-NI, the chemical lining for Coke cans. Weihai Jinhong did not respond to requests from Bloomberg News for comment.
The interrogation is almost a masterclass in how you unravel a scheme like this, because at almost every stage, the FBI catches her in a lie.
The plan was to form a new company.
That's
a joint venture company.
Yeah, that's what Mr. Liu thinking, okay, but it was never get there.
For her part, You insists that all she ever did was to introduce the Chinese firm to some other companies interested in getting into the business. In the interrogation room, this is where she starts to come unstuck.
Did you guys sign a contract?
For
your work over there?
I did.
Okay.
I signed, but there's no work.
There's no work.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no work because my work basically just introduced. I did not do anything.
Unfortunately for You, the FBI had a copy of the contract.
Party A, Jinhong's responsibilities include investing the initial amount of 6 million yuan and providing the location among other preparation work, which is expected to take 1 year. Party B, responsibilities include to be the chief technical officer of the project, providing technical assistance, leading the party's research and development team, and communicating with foreign manufacturers and developing new overseas joint ventures.
This just talking though.
Ms. Yo, it's not just talking. Look at the facts. You signed a contract.
Yeah.
They said they would pay you. The contract was to help build a lab. They said when the lab was built, you would have shareholders in that lab. And then weeks later, you're making emails inquiring about building a lab. It's not just paper.
Then the FBI agents reveal their hand. They have her voicemails and have read her text messages. In quick succession, they outline how she knew that joining the 1,000 Talents might invite the FBI's attention. Liu had suggested that she keep her job at Coca-Cola to, quote, continue to leverage the latest technologies at Coke. Her sister had received payments from the Chinese government on her behalf. Yo didn't want any publicity around winning the 1,000 talents for fear of alerting US authorities. And the coup de grace? A voicemail left by her sister.
Yo says, unlike other TTP winners who are losers overseas, she is doing well in the United States. She is the one taking the risk during the current unfriendly period between US-Chinese relations, and she won't give her technology away easily until she sees money for real.
This time, Yo's response is far more muted.
Well, I did not do anything.
What her messages reveal about that defense is she was trying to share it. She wanted to get paid first. And ultimately, she was prosecuted not based on whether she shared it with the Chinese government or not, or did she take it? That was the central question. And her messages show that the end game of this was to share that information and launch this company in China and get rich.
Yes, this is a tale about stealing Coke's other secret formula. But it's also about how China is incentivizing espionage far beyond the realms of defense technology and national security and into the furthest reaches of the economy.
On August 15th, 2023, hundreds of police officers launched pre-dawn raids across Singapore.
So far, 10 persons have been arrested and charged.
They are being accused of laundering gains from organized crime.
This was a big news story just by the sheer amount of assets involved.
Cryptocurrencies,
Luxury watches,
luxury cars,
luxury bags,
homes.
pieces of jewelry.
It has now become the biggest money laundering case in Singapore's history.
It equals to about $2 billion US.
For decades, the Asian city has welcomed foreign money, resulting in it becoming one of the wealthiest countries on the planet. But beyond all the legitimate investment, Singapore's openness is now under scrutiny. In the latest case, for attracting billions of dollars of allegedly dirty money, some of it even funneled through the world's biggest banks.
This is drawing the attention onto the kind of loopholes that potentially have allowed this massive amount of wealth to have been accumulated.
The origin of the accused has also shone a light on global money flows and whether Singapore has done enough to police them.
The suspects are all from China or have links to China.
Singapore is a small country, so it is an economy that cannot sustain domestic consumption the way bigger countries like China or the US can. And that's why investments are critical to Singapore's growth.
There's great ease in living and staying here, especially for expats.
Singapore has long capitalized on its reputation to attract the global rich. Crime is low, politics stable, and banks welcoming. Wealth flows into Singapore totaled $1.5 trillion in 2022.
In terms of assets parked in Singapore, it is the third largest, only after Switzerland and Hong Kong.
But this flood of money has also come with downsides as the country has become more affluent. Skyrocketing prices and growing wealth inequality have become contentious issues in the city-state.
If we look at polls right now, some of the top issues that people mention is the problem of housing affordability. Singapore is the most expensive city in the world to own a car. There is a danger that this resentment and unhappiness starts to be conflated with the issue of a lot of these foreigners coming in.
A sizable amount of the money coming into Singapore is from China. Since 2019, investment has risen 79% to 19 billion Singaporean dollars. This exodus of wealth is partly down to President Xi Jinping launching a drive for what he calls common prosperity, a policy to redistribute wealth.
In the past decade, the Chinese government has tightened many regulations, and also we have seen many crackdowns on various businesses. Also, the strenuous restrictions during the pandemic also prompted many Chinese to leave home in search of a safer place. Why Singapore? Chinese Mandarin is one of the 4 official languages. The majority of the ethnic groups in Singapore are Chinese people.
Signs of Chinese wealth are all over Singapore, from high-end clubs to car dealerships and even golf clubs.
Singapore has always been of great attraction to the ultra-rich. It is not just Chinese that have flocked to Singapore in recent years. You have people like Ray Dalio, James Dyson, who have essentially set up family offices here to kind of manage their wealth.
It's instruments like these that have been exploited and seen alleged criminals find ways to deposit their money in Singapore. Family offices are private, loosely regulated companies set up by the ultra-rich to manage their investments. In the same time period that China started its strict pandemic lockdowns, the number of single-family offices in Singapore tripled.
It is a business that Singapore government has promoted over the years and set up ecosystem like lawyers, banks to support family offices. Of course, when you have a lot of money flowing in, no matter how strict the regulation is, some bad apples do flow in.
What we know about the 10 alleged criminals?
Some of them have been on China wanted list since 2015 or 16 for online gambling operations, which is illegal in China.
All of them came to Singapore in the past few years to basically set up businesses here.
Some suspects said that they have been advised to set up a family office as a means to stay in Singapore.
Many suspects also set up companies.
What one can do is to hire a local citizen or a permanent resident to be a director and a secretary to the company.
For a few of these accused, they had a corporate secretary who essentially had a few hundred businesses under their names. During the process of our investigations, we found a company that can help you to set up a business in Singapore within 24 hours.
Officials are examining whether loopholes or weaknesses in the system allowed the suspects to move their money to Singapore. When they arrived, they didn't exactly live modest or quiet lives.
All of these suspects lived in highly coveted real estate in Singapore. We are talking about places that are the equivalent of Mayfair in London or Central Park in New York.
All the charges brought against the suspects related to money laundering and forgery. So far, none of them have been convicted of a crime, and some have said they'll fight the charges in court.
We have to be very careful, we have to be very discreet, keep it small, but examine the links and then move in so that the money doesn't move out of Singapore. We do have evidence that shows clearly when they brought the money in, there were forged documents being used to justify the provenance of the funds.
After the arrest, the government said they are setting up an interministerial committee to look whether there are gaps in any part of the government that allowed illicit money to come to Singapore.
The international connectedness, diversity, and depth of our financial ecosystem also makes us attractive to criminals, who will seek to exploit these very qualities to hide their tracks and launder their ill-gotten gains.
That's something that is faced not just by Singapore, but by all major financial centres. $2.8 billion were seized across the whole ecosystem, right? And of which I think about 1.5 billion was also found in the financial services sector. So we have to ask ourselves, what can we do better?
Questions are also being asked about who might have enabled the movement of allegedly tainted money. The suspects had held funds in more than 10 financial institutions in Singapore, including major Western banks Credit Suisse and Citigroup.
As one of the leading international financial centers in the world, the daily transactions in Singapore are voluminous. If we make the rules too tight, then it is the vast majority of innocent applicants who will be unnecessarily penalized.
As far as my system is concerned, the system is clean, the system did what it was supposed to do. If my system had been corrupted,
Then you'll be in trouble.
then I'm in trouble.
The essential question for not just Singapore, but any financial hub is how much is the cost and how much is the risk that you are willing to take in order to attract the wealthy and businesses, while at the same time maintaining the amount of safeguards in order to deter potential illegality from coming in.
Barry and Honey Sherman were found dead in their home in Toronto on December 15th, 2017.
The investigation continues into the shocking deaths of a pharmaceutical billionaire and his wife.
It's pretty rare for people of this wealth to be murdered, and in fact, Barry and Honey Sherman were among the wealthiest people ever to be murdered. What we don't know is who did it. I wrote initially in 2018 a long story for Bloomberg Businessweek about this case. I'm from Toronto. I grew up in the Jewish community where the Shermans loomed very large. I was very vaguely acquainted with the family, so of course I was interested. The reason I came back to it was there was a lot of new information, and we now know a great deal more than we did in 2018. We still don't know the central answer of who done it. Who was responsible for this heinous crime. Barry was the founder and chairman of a company called Apotex, a very large generic pharmaceutical manufacturer that filled something like 1 in 5 prescriptions in the country. They were worth several $1 billion. They were also sort of ubiquitous, very well known. They were big philanthropists.
For decades, Honey and I have both felt the commitment to do what we could for the community. She does all the community service work. She's been chair of just about everything. And my time is better spent doing what I can to try to earn money so I can write the checks.
Fair and equitable.
Fair and equitable.
The Shermans, despite being extremely wealthy, lived very modest lives. They flew economy. Barry drove a series of kind of rattling cars. They would open the door for anyone who knocked. They did not live in fear, and frankly, they had no reason to, until, of course, they did.
Shocking news. The founder of Canadian drug giant Apotex, Barry Sherman, and his wife Honey have been found dead in their York Mills mansion.
The circumstances of their death appear suspicious.
The manner in which they were found was bizarre. They were found in their basement where they had an indoor swimming pool. Their bodies held up by belts that had been wrapped around their necks. So a pretty gruesome scene, as you can imagine.
Forensic officers combed the billionaire's home looking for something, anything that may determine who killed Barry Sherman and his wife, Honey.
The day the bodies were found, there were quite a few people in their house. There was a housekeeper, there was a gardener, a personal trainer, and there was also a real estate agent who was showing their house to potential buyers. They go through the whole house, it's a big place, I believe 12,000 square feet. And toward the end of the tour, they get into the basement. She walks into the pool room and sees in the sort of dim light her clients, Barry and Honey Sherman, on the pool deck, sort of slumped and attached to the railing with these leather belts. And it's clear to everyone that they're dead. The police were treating this as a possible murder-suicide.
We are not currently seeking or looking for an outstanding suspect.
The idea being that Barry Sherman had killed his wife and then killed himself. And that, from the start, struck a lot of people close to the Shermans as very odd. There's just physically, it was very hard to imagine. Barry was not in great shape. He was not a strong guy. The people who were really most upset by this, understandably, were the Shermans' 4 adult children. And they were concerned that the police were heading down the wrong path. So they commissioned a private investigation. First priority was getting a second autopsy done, and that found forensic evidence. Strongly suggested that this was in fact a double homicide.
New details this hour on the deaths of Toronto billionaires Barry and Honey Sherman.
There were markings on Barry Sherman's wrists, which seemed to indicate that his hands had been bound at some point. There were actually 2 sets of marks on the Shermans' necks. So obviously there's a mark from the belt. But there was also another marking, a narrower one, and that looked like it could have been from a cord or a rope. But That wasn't found at the scene. So the implication, of course, being that they were strangled and then moved. The private team reported their findings to the police immediately.
It became clear that they were both murdered, and the Toronto Police Service should not have drawn any conclusion which suggested self-inflicted injuries.
However, it takes about a month for the police to actually meet with the pathologist who the private team had hired. A couple of days later, the senior officer gives a press conference.
We believe now we have sufficient evidence to describe this as a double homicide investigation, and that both Honey and Barry Sherman were in fact targeted.
There were tons of people who were speculated as suspects. For example, Barry Sherman's cousin, Carrie Winter, who was engaged in a really acrimonious legal battle with Sherman.
He cared about one thing: money, making lots of it, and not caring who he destroyed.
And in fact, a judge threw out the claim in September of 2017, so not long before the murders. This timing was suspicious to everyone.
I was betrayed. My cousin hurt me, and now I want to hurt him.
As you can imagine, this got the police pretty interested in him, but there was just no evidence tying him to the crime. There are the Sherman's children who inherited the entire fortune. They became, at a stroke, billionaires. So of the 4 kids, there are 3 girls, 1 boy. The boy is Jonathan Sherman, who was the most business-focused, and he would take a key role in managing these assets, which the kids had just inherited.
This has been so incredibly painful and so bizarrely surreal. My sisters and I pledged to rise again and to continue thriving, and knowing, as our parents always reminded us, that with great privilege comes enormous responsibility.
As the Sherman's children took over the empire, things began to change pretty quickly. At the time of his death, Sherman was very focused on expansion. The children, however, wanted to slow down investments, to back off on expansion, and essentially to get the business ready to sell. And in 2022, they agreed to sell to a private equity firm called SK Capital. And certainly his colleagues have told me that Barry Sherman would have been horrified by this. But of course, he's not around to make that decision. Sherman was very unusual in a lot of ways. He loved kind of backing people. The person he funded most lavishly was Frank D'Angelo. He and Sherman were initially in the beer business together. Frank is kind of a comic figure. He had a low-budget talk show. He produces B movies, with titles like Sicilian Vampire, which Sherman funded.
Can I trust you? Because if I can't trust you, I have to come back and kill you.
And the people around him thought this was completely bizarre. They could not understand why he would keep advancing him tons and tons of money. That was just one of these very odd financial entanglements that, as the police and private investigators dug into Sherman's affairs, they had to wade through. The other big area that was worth looking into was competitors. Sherman had made a lot of enemies in the pharmaceutical world over the years. He had himself speculated that one day a rival pharmaceutical company might have him killed. And all of this was done, but none of it has led to arrests, let alone a prosecution. After really not saying anything publicly for about 2 years, they released video of the walking man.
We seized a very large amount of security video footage. We are left with one individual whom we have been unable to identify. The timing of this individual's appearance is in line with when we believe the murders took place. Based on this evidence, we're classifying this individual as a suspect.
Why did it take you 4 years to release this video?
We undertook these investigative steps to identify this individual, and now having gotten to the point where we have not been able to do so, this is now the prudent time to release this to the public and seek the public's assistance.
We don't know if releasing this footage earlier would have had some benefit. It is striking that the police were in possession of this footage in 2018. We're dealing with an intensely secretive law enforcement culture. The default is to say nothing, and that is largely what has happened in this case. Who would have a motive to kill both Barry and his wife? You could imagine, for example, in some business dispute that had gone horribly wrong, he might be a target, but why also target her? The other thing that I think really has been very confusing for a lot of people who've looked at this is the method. You would think, a bullet does the job perfectly well, but no, they were strangled, which is painful, intimate, not what you would imagine, for example, a hitman employing. We are 5 years on now, and there have been no arrests, let alone any charges. The whodunit, the central mystery here remains completely unsolved.
A top CEO and her security team were dining at this Copenhagen restaurant when they noticed something unsettling outside the 17th floor window. A drone seemed to be monitoring them. They had good reason to be paranoid.
They were here celebrating the end of a 2.5-month investigation that found that the Chinese company Huawei had conducted this ham-fisted espionage effort to try to secure a $200 million contract.
This was about more than just money. Telecoms networks are a critical part of any country's national security. The investigation revealed the extent of the alleged dirty tricks that a Chinese tech giant would deploy to get a piece of it. It all started in early 2019 here at the headquarters of TDC Group. It's Denmark's biggest telecoms firm. It's also where the team dining at Restaurant Silo worked.
At the time, this was early 2019, TDC had a tender offer out there for a contract worth more than $200 million to build their 5G telecoms network. And at that time, they had whittled down the bidders to just two, Sweden's Ericsson and China's Huawei. The details in those tender offers are very closely protected. Things like pricing. How much do you charge for things? Ericsson, as it turns out, had offered to do this job for less money than Huawei. Huawei was not supposed to know that. Huawei somehow found out, and just hours before the final decision, submitted an emergency revision to its bid. And in fact, its bid was slightly lower than Ericsson's.
How had the information managed to seep out? TDC called an emergency investigation.
Within that decade, Huawei had leapfrogged other Nordic rivals, including Ericsson and Nokia, to become the world's biggest maker of telecommunications equipment.
While not as big as Tencent or Alibaba, Huawei is a far more successful Chinese tech export. The company says that its technology connects over 3 billion people in 170 countries.
The way they did that was not without its controversies, right?
Yeah, for many years, Huawei has been under suspicion by the US government and others for potentially being under the control of the Chinese government.
We start with the Biden administration, which is said to be considering cutting Huawei off from all of its American suppliers.
Huawei is a bad actor. There's a lot of intelligence suggesting that they're very close to the Chinese military and to Chinese intel.
So controversy has followed Huawei wherever it's gone. But here in Denmark, Huawei was a trusted provider. Huawei had worked with TDC since 2013. So for many years, Huawei had supplied the key equipment that TDC used for its 3G and its 4G networks. Huawei had an office on this campus, and many of its engineers badged into TDC every single day to service the network. It was seen as a trusted provider. TDC becomes very alarmed because it's clear that somebody has leaked to Huawei Ericsson's sensitive information. TDC begins an investigation focused on potential insiders, potential hacking, and also potential eavesdropping within their offices. And in fact, a sweep of the boardroom found microphones hidden in the boardroom. These are some of the most sensitive types of investigations because in this case, maybe 5, maybe 10 at most people had this information.
What do they find?
What they find is that the head of special projects, a guy named Dov Goldstein, they find very quickly that he had leaked this information to Huawei. The investigation as such was fairly straightforward. However, when they requested CCTV footage of Dov Goldstein's comings and goings, Dov Goldstein finds out and he confronts the executive team at TDC. So there was a leak within the security investigation. This heightened the paranoia even further. The security team decides we can't trust our own environment. We need to leave. We need to take our evidence. They seize the executives' phones. They seize their laptops. This is a very serious investigation. They realize we can't hold that information here. We need to take that evidence to another place, a secure location where we can conduct this investigation. So if you look up there, that big brown building is the Plesner Law Firm. That's the building where TDC Security Group, moved their investigation. They booked a conference room on the 15th floor of these law offices as the secure place to conduct the rest of their investigation.
But it quickly sort of went awry.
That same night that they moved their investigation from TDC headquarters here, Plesner's computer network came under sustained hacking attacks. The next day, after midnight, a security guard noticed a drone hovering outside the same 15th floor window where the team was working.
One of the reasons they saw the drone, it had lights on it?
It apparently had lights, which adds even more levels of intrigue to it because if you lit up that room at that time with the blinds not drawn, you would have seen the full timeline of this team's investigation.
The paranoia heightened. Members of the security team started to notice the same strangers popping up around town, appearing to follow and photograph them as they ate at restaurants or entered and left their homes. Even TDC CEO Alison Kirkby seemed to have attracted a persistent tail. To make matters worse, Huawei managers had written to the Danish Prime Minister warning that should Huawei not get the TDC contract, it would, quote, severely affect other Chinese companies' investment confidence in Denmark. The Prime Minister's office didn't comment. The reaction was swift. Goldstein left the company. The investigation found he had allegedly leaked Ericsson's secret information to Jason Lan. He led Huawei's operations in Denmark and, investigators determined, had essentially cultivated Goldstein as a source. He returned to China. With the investigation concluded and alleged source of the leaks identified, a celebratory dinner was called. They gathered here at Restaurant Silo. Alison Kirkby reflected on the paranoia that had enveloped them and cracked a joke about when she'd next see a drone. Minutes later, a drone reappeared outside the window. The security team watched as it descended to the street below. Men in a white van grabbed it and sped away. And the contract? Ericsson still won it. No criminal charges were filed as a consequence of the affair. Goldstein declined to comment. Ericsson declined to comment.
A lawyer for Jason Lan said his client believes that he has acted in compliance with all applicable laws and that his relationship to Dov Goldstein was of a professional nature and one that was appropriate in the circumstances.
Huawei said in a statement,
Huawei complies with applicable laws and regulations and strives for the highest standards of business conduct. We deny any wrongdoing.
TDC said in a statement,
we recognize some of the things in Bloomberg's findings from our own files. None of the employees directly mentioned by Bloomberg work for the company today.
You can find the full story on businessweek.com.
This is Valerie. She was 5 years old when she received chemotherapy.
Soy la mamá de Valerie. Ella fue diagnosticada en el mes de julio del 2018. Fue diagnosticada con leucemia. En el noviembre del 2019 ya iba a cumplir un año en tratamiento La doctora, ella decía que ya la niña estaba superando la enfermedad. O sea, estaba súper bien. La doctora me había dicho que en noviembre del 2019 estaba bien la niña.
Valerie would receive chemotherapy treatments here, at the Clínica Medical Duarte, in the small border city of Cúcuta, in Colombia. On January 23, 2020, doctors at the clinic gave Valerie a dose of methotrexate, a drug used to treat cancer. Less than 24 hours later, she was back in the hospital. Days later, she was dead. The drug Valerie was given, methotrexate, was made by Naprod Life Sciences, a manufacturer headquartered in India, a country that supplies 20% of the world's generic drugs. But instead of being sterile, the medicine was contaminated with bacteria and had become dangerous. In a months-long investigation, we learned this wasn't an isolated incident. Naprod's medicines have been linked to dire quality issues, with almost zero consequences. This is a story of a drug maker with a dangerous track record and how it keeps selling medicine, leaving families and doctors to suffer the consequences. Methotrexate is a drug used to treat leukemia and other cancers and has been around for decades. When given as an injection, the conditions in which the drug is made are always supposed to be sterile. If the raw ingredients aren't tested adequately, if a production line isn't cleaned properly, if the water isn't filtered thoroughly, the life-saving medicine could become potentially lethal. Naprod Life Sciences plays a crucial, if sometimes unnoticed, role in the world's drug supply chain. None of its medicines are for sale in the US. Instead, it mostly sells directly to suppliers in low-income countries. Batches of the cancer drug methotrexate, made here in 2018 and 2019, were sent to clinics in Colombia. Later, Colombian drug regulators confirmed that a dangerous bacteria was found in the drug. Doctors suspected more than 100 patients had suffered reactions linked to the contaminated medicine. A total of 4 kids died, and the drug was later recalled. My colleague Priyanka Pulla looked into Naprod's operations in India.
This is a plant that makes many low-cost cancer generics for big brand names such as Intas, Dr. Reddy's, and Abbott. Former employees of Naprod whom we spoke to told us that the quality control in this company was not up to the mark and was neglected greatly. The former quality control employee spoke to us on condition of anonymity. He was asked to hurry through quality tests.
Our seniors used to say sometimes just skip that part and complete that work.
What did you think when you heard about this Pseudomonas contamination in Colombia coming from Naprod's products?
It is found in the field while it is definitely coming from the company, it is not coming from anywhere else. The damage can never be reversed. It is that lethal.
Indian regulators have frequently failed to detect and clamp down on really dangerous quality issues.
Maharashtra FDA is trying their best to get a good quality medicine to people around the world, not only in India. Though we don't have any sufficient staff, we are trying, we are working very hard. And they have corrected their problems. They told that we already rectified. It was a minor problem in Colombia. They have asked and they have already taken the action. They have investigated.
State governments are very eager to attract the pharmaceutical industry and to get them to set up their manufacturing plants because it helps them generate revenue and jobs. And the state regulators are directly under these state governments. These state regulators are not very well staffed, they are underfunded. If you put these two things together, it's a very dangerous cocktail because this means that India's huge manufacturing industry doesn't get as much oversight as it needs.
This wasn't the first time quality issues were found at Naprod. In India, 3 separate batches of its cancer drugs failed quality tests in 2017 and 2018. In Ethiopia, researchers tested multiple samples of its chemo drug and found only half the stated active ingredient. Yet the company has not faced any serious consequences from regulators, the big pharmaceutical companies buying Naprod's products, or public health warnings from the World Health Organization. Naprod declined to comment on Valerie's case or other cases in Colombia, citing ongoing legal proceedings. The company said it has responded appropriately to quality concerns raised by regulators and makes high-quality products.
La niña no aguantaba el dolor en la columna, no aguantaba el vómito, el dolor de cabeza. Me queda así como un dolor grande de no haber podido hacer más por ella. Y de lo que ella se despidió cuando ella me dice, no, ya no aguanto más, mami, ya. Y me tomó de las manos y se desprendió, ya sentí ahí que se me fue en ese momento. Fueron las últimas palabras que me dijo.
So who is to blame for Valerie's death? And how can people in low-income countries ensure their drugs are safe? Despite its track record, Naprod continued selling medicines around the world, cashing in on growing markets for generic cancer drugs. And Valerie's case is stuck in the labyrinth of Colombian government bureaucracy. The Attorney General's office received Valerie's autopsy report 4 years ago. It has listed her cause of death as under study. In the years that have passed, there have been few signs of progress in the probe. In recent months, the Attorney General's office has started interviewing families and others involved. But 2,500 miles away, a researcher in the US is trying to perfect a test to help detect bad quality drugs before they reach patients.
The market for chemotherapy products is increasing, and it's increasing in locations where often the regulatory agencies are under-resourced, particularly for analysis of highly toxic chemotherapy products. And so it's a very risky situation right now.
The paper test her team developed is a field lab kit run on a sample of medicine, testing for the amount of active ingredient. It costs as little as $2 and can be done easily by a nurse using a cell phone.
And these are a field screening device that you can use to check a medicine quickly and see if it looks good or if it looks suspicious.
Nearly 4 years after Valerie's death, Naprod continues to sell its drugs to customers around the world.
O sea, yo como la mamá de la niña, este sufrimiento es muy grande y yo sé que no solamente soy yo la que estoy pasando por esto, sé que hay más padres que están sufriendo porque este vacío es muy fuerte, o sea, de la pérdida. O sea, para mí, o sea, sería importante que, o sea, no pasara más, o sea, que no tuvieran que otro padre sufrir.
When my daughter started to sick, then I took her to the hospital. They said, let me go at the pharmacies to buy these syrups. Then I go at the pharmacy, buy these syrups, but the sick never rest. It's there I lost my daughter.
Alusain Bangura's daughter was just 10 months old when he buried her here. She was one of more than 60 children poisoned in Gambia last year by tainted medicine produced thousands of miles away. India is known as the pharmacy of the world. The country's booming $50 billion pharmaceutical industry has been hailed for bringing affordable drugs to the masses. But along with that success comes new dangers.
We lost our kids. They have to do something. We know that they know that we lost our kids, but still now we don't hear nothing from them. Yeah, we want justice for our kids.
This year, drugs with the same kind of contamination have been turning up around the world, from Central Asia to the Pacific Islands. I traveled to Gambia and India to investigate how these drugs were contaminated and what India is doing about it.
I remember this 7-year-old child that I was called to see. In the morning we dialyzed the child and I sent the child to ICU so that the monitoring would improve. And in the afternoon I got there, the child was still unconscious. The next morning, before I came back, I was told the child is dead.
In the summer of 2022, dozens of children started showing up at the Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital with the same mysterious conditions. Their kidneys had stopped working. 4-year-old Aisha Darbo was prescribed an anti-nausea syrup after she came down with a fever.
You know, sometimes it's not easy to say much about her. Only that I can say she's smart and clever.
After taking the syrup, Aisha's health condition deteriorated.
You don't want to eat nothing. Yeah.
Soon she was at the hospital.
On that day, they allowed me there to be there. Yeah.
She asked to be with you?
Yeah, she wanted me with me.
Within a few days, Aisha Darbo was dead. Tests show the medicine she took was contaminated with a toxic industrial solvent used in brake fluid. The drugs were made by Maiden Pharmaceuticals, based in India. So how did poison get into those medicine bottles in the first place? Syrups consist of a tiny amount of active ingredient suspended in a watery solution. In order to dissolve the active ingredient, drug makers add propylene glycol, a harmless, clear, slightly sweet liquid. But sometimes, chemical dealers will try to pass off other chemicals as propylene glycol. These other chemicals are called diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol. They're much cheaper and highly toxic. Both of these poisons were found in the Gambia drugs. After news broke about the deaths, India said it would investigate what happened at Maiden Pharmaceuticals. But then the nation's top drug official claimed Maiden's drugs were fine and that they didn't kill anybody. In statements to local media, Maiden representatives have said they didn't do anything wrong and that their drugs weren't to blame. They didn't respond to our inquiries. India's health ministry also didn't respond to our inquiries.
Behind me is the Maiden Pharmaceuticals plant. We asked to go inside, but the security guard said nobody was allowed in.
The pharmaceutical industry is a big economic success story for India. Criticism of Indian drug companies is often seen through a nationalist lens.
Now, the government has said that the exact one-to-one causal relationship of the death is not yet provided by the World Health Organization. The government has raised certain questions to WHO that is there any specific link saying that the 66 deaths are directly and exclusively linked to the cough syrup?
I spoke to a retired drug executive who advises the Federation of Pharmaceutical Entrepreneurs in Delhi.
How you are so sure that the drug was responsible for death of the children? Indian pharmaceutical exports are growing, and naturally when you grow, you definitely enter into field where somebody else was there earlier, and his business is being harmed. So there may be a ploy against the Indian companies, that to defame the Indian companies, to see that the Indian companies' exports are limited.
Healthcare watchdog groups in India say that drug regulators there often see their role as promoting the industry rather than policing it, and that they don't have the staff and resources to keep tabs on some 10,000 drug factories.
Even when the WHO was, issuing multiple alerts that the root cause of deaths of 70 children in the Gambia is directly linked to an Indian-based pharma manufacturer, still the government was in complete denial.
WHO recommends all countries detect and remove these products from circulation to prevent further harm to patients.
3 independent labs confirmed the contamination, and an international panel found the syrups led to the deaths. Indian drug regulators could have gotten to the bottom of it. Instead, they called the whole thing fake news.
And I quote, "There is no direct causal relationship between cough syrup consumption and deaths of children in Gambia."
Not long after that, kids started dying elsewhere. This time it was in Uzbekistan. About 20 children died. Uzbek authorities traced the problem to imported cough syrups made by another Indian manufacturer. They were tainted with the same poisons found in Gambia. Then a dozen kids died in Cameroon, and suspicion fell on another Indian manufacturer, and more bad cough syrup turned up in Liberia and the Pacific Islands. Where are the bad chemicals coming from? And where else have they gone? We visited a warehouse in Delhi where some of the chemicals used in the syrups came from. It was recently destroyed in a fire. The owner wouldn't talk to us. Since the outbreaks, India's drug regulator has tightened rules for syrup exports and cracked down on some companies making substandard drugs. But it continues to deny that Indian drugs were to blame for the deaths in Gambia, and it hasn't figured out where all the contaminated chemicals are coming from.
At the end of the day, nobody has been charged, nobody is taking responsibility. I'm sure if this was in any European country or North American country, maybe this won't happen.
Meanwhile, drug makers continue to make medicine with little oversight and ship it around the world.
Before I go, I was starting crying there. She told me to stop crying.
Who did?
Yes, sir.
She said?
She told me to stop crying.
On the afternoon of January 7th, 2018, Michael Turpin was in Las Vegas for a crypto conference when he got an alert that his email password had been changed. Turpin felt sick. He hadn't reset his password. He soon realized he was the victim of a so-called SIM swapping hack. Turpin says that during the hour and a half it took an AT&T customer service representative to deal with the breach, the hackers gained access to his crypto wallets. At the time, what they found was worth $24 million, and they took it all. SIM swapping is a crude form of digital identity theft. Thieves walk into a cell phone company store and convince an employee to reassign their victim's cell phone number to a new phone, either through lying or, in Turpin's case, bribery. Sometimes they even manage to do it over the phone. With access to the phone number, the thieves can reset their victim's email and social media passwords. The two-factor identity authentication text goes not to the victim, but to the phone number the hackers now control. With the access they gain, the hackers can root around for files that may contain passwords to stuff like crypto wallets, which is exactly what they did with Turpin. Americans reported more than 1,600 SIM swapping incidents in 2022, totaling more than $68 million in losses, according to the FBI, which is up from the year before. And because the scam exploits the vulnerabilities of service providers, it's also not the sort of thing even a security-conscious person can prevent. In Turpin's case, the hackers were a gang of young gamers. The ringleader was a then 15-year-old named Ellis Pinsky from the rich New York City suburb of Irvington. Another conspirator, the then 20-year-old Nick Truglia, helped launder the crypto. Truglia and others allegedly used the proceeds to fund a flashy lifestyle of luxury watches and cars, high-end nightclubs, private jets, and lots of video games. Unfortunately for the hackers, Turpin had the resources, the connections, and the personality required to track them down. And he went after AT&T, his cell phone provider, as well. On August 15th, 2018, he announced that he was suing the company for $224 million. Turpin, who had made his first fortune in tech PR, made sure to publicize his suit. He soon started getting phone calls to his house from burner phones with people using auto-tune to conceal their voices. One of those calls was from a private jet broker named Chris David, who said he'd helped set Nick Truglia up with a $40,000 private jet service, concert tickets, and bottle service tables at Manhattan clubs such as One Oak and Up and Down. There'd been a falling out and some harsh words over a failed deal to sell a Bentley. David had recorded Truglia bragging about hacking Turpin during a late-night video game session, and he sent those tapes to Turpin. Truglia is the only one of the hackers to be convicted for SIM-swapping Turpin. In April of 2023, a judge threw out Turpin's civil case against AT&T and agreed with the telecommunications provider that it wasn't their responsibility. Turpin plans to appeal. He, along with prosecutors, lawyers, and other victims of SIM-swapping, believe it's an ongoing problem and that people are losing smaller but still significant sums every week through SIM-swapping. The problem isn't going away anytime soon. The minors being recruited into SIM-swapping gangs can escape prosecution, and while passwords can be changed, the human vulnerability to manipulation is harder to address. Even the extra security measures offered by providers may not be enough to protect you. It's a good reminder that even a small part of your phone can be a big vulnerability.